there's just so much more innovation happening at the moment because they just don't have a lot of alternatives. And some of those things are going to fail and retailers aren't going to like them. Other things are going to succeed and they're going to push harder on the gas.
Yeah.
And manufacturers with them, because manufacturers are learning just as fast as the retailers are learning about how do you grow your business in each of these environments.
Welcome to eCommerce Deep Dive, the show where we explore e-commerce business strategy and the future of shopping online. Your host is John Giorso, founder and CEO of Orca Pacific, a full-service agency dedicated to growing brands on Amazon. Every week, John talks shop with the biggest players in retail and e-commerce. Today we have Chuck Linden, e-commerce veteran and former EVP of Global e-commerce at Crayola. He and John discuss inventory, forecasting, and marketing strategies for seasonal brands. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it'd be great for our audience just to hear a little bit about your background and then what you're up to now.
Sure. So my background is split in a bunch of different pieces. The first third of my career, I grew up in traditional CPG, came up through the financial ranks, working really with sales and marketing on how to use the financials to help drive the business. The second third really spent time in international, really growing and as a general manager, building out an international business for Crayola. And then the last 5 years really working in global business development with a heavy emphasis on e-commerce, direct to consumer, and building out an Amazon platform, and then moving from there into some of the other e-commerce opportunities.
Awesome. And what are you doing today?
And today, today is week 2 of started my own independent advisory called Candela Growth Partners, and really trying to help manufacturers figure out Amazon and all the other channels, and most importantly, link that with the traditional side of the business, and say, how do you have a business that is successful in e-commerce, but really leverages all the great things people were doing in the traditional space, or brings those traditional skill sets into an e-commerce business.
Awesome. So, I know you have a lot of experience in seasonal product. To maybe focus kind of here, starting out on Amazon, what are some of the considerations that brands need to make when selling a seasonal product? How does seasonality impact a business on Amazon, in your opinion?
Yeah. So in my opinion, when I think about seasonality, I think about start with page views. The page views are a lot lower sometimes in parts of the year than they are in other times. It doesn't mean you're not still trying to move the needle.
Sure.
But you got to move it in advance of the season so that you're really ready to capture the season. And then you have to lean into the early part. And then the algorithms just work for you instead of work against you. If you come in late in a seasonal business, it's not that easy to catch up. Everybody else is already out there. The algorithms are already running. You're at a disadvantage. So timing matters more on a seasonal business than it does on an everyday business.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. That ramp up period, that flywheel, I think is just not a factor at traditional retail. The product's either on the shelf or it's not. And obviously as soon as it's on the shelf, it starts to sell, and that's your kind of starting point. Where with Amazon, there is really no starting point, right? I mean, it's kind of a ramp. When does back to school start? Does it start in June? Does it start in May? Does it start in,
That's one of the really big differences between traditional and e-commerce. Is for a traditional company, they've built schedules and timelines around when new products have to be, when they're developed, when they're sold into the retailer, when the retailer makes commitments, when the shipments happen. And it's all very structured. Amazon really broke the rules on that and just said, okay, as soon as you have it, just let us know, put it up, and we'll start selling it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean some of these things don't still apply when it comes to how do you still win.
Sure.
Especially as you get scale and you're talking about bigger volumes.
Yep, absolutely. So how do you think for these seasonal businesses, so there's sort of the dynamics on the platform, there's demand driving, there's advertising. How do you think about planning from an inventory perspective?
Yeah, it's a tough call, and we've made some mistakes over the years on that. So it's great if you have some experience and you have some benchmarks. But it really does come down to the math to some extent. Okay, if I can estimate how many page views I need, if I can estimate my conversion rates, and I can do that over time, I can make a ballpark estimate. And if I'm wrong, I can learn and tweak and continue to evolve. Okay, I'm not getting enough page views. but the conversion rate still feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, you know what, I'm getting the page views and it's not converting. What's wrong with the page? What's wrong with the product? How can I tweak to drive the conversion rate up to get closer to that forecast? So the forecast is almost really more of a marker that you can use as you measure yourself to say, am I on track? And if I'm not, what's not working that I thought would be working?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. So, speaking of seasonal, there was just a report that came out that Prime Day has now been pushed to September. I would personally be shocked if it's not the first or second week in September. So let's kind of assume it's that time period. What are your thoughts on kind of how this changes this holiday?
Yeah, I think if it's the second or third week in September instead of the first week of September, I think it starts the season early.
It's just Q4.
It's all of a sudden you're rolling right into Q4 and you got to get ahead, because by the time you finish Prime Day and that algorithm starts to run, you're in mid-October and you're already seeing bumps for holiday come mid-October. So you're really tight. Early September, you might see a little bit more of a back in school, hope, knock on wood, of course.
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully there's schools to go back to.
Yeah, because that's a whole other conversation. But I think the 1st of September is a little bit more is a little less clear than if it's the second or third week. If it's the second or third week, if you're a giftable business, you better be betting on a holiday in September instead of in October and November.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. I mean, I think it makes sense that Amazon would not forego Prime Day in terms of just the brand equity they've built up. You can't really skip a year and have continue the momentum, the phenomenon that they've created. But if it gets pushed into Q4, you call it whatever you want, right? But it's just, at what point is it just starting Black Friday, Cyber Monday early? Because Black Friday, Cyber Monday is already the whole month of November. Yeah.
If they go to October, then it just bleeds and you have no idea when, it just all starts when it starts.
It just deals for all of Q4.
But I think in September, you're going to see a lot of the same. You're going to see a lot of the same thing. And I think to people who are managing their rankings,
they're
going to have to think really hard about what their program is in September and a September program. That's less important in July for a seasonal and holiday business. But in September, you don't want to be on the wrong side of that.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I mean, it's so Q4. I don't know how Q4 could really have become more critical. September is close enough to say it's basically Q4 at that point. Now it's 60% of your volume was in Q4. Now maybe 80% of it is, if you include. I mean, I'm taking liberties here, including September, but that last 4 months of the year becomes, for a lot of brands, if it wasn't already the make or break period, it's now almost the entire year of sales could be captured in that. Months.
And especially for businesses that essentially aren't going to have a Q2.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, you couldn't add more multiples to the importance of that fourth trimester.
Yeah.
Or third trimester.
Sure. Hey everyone, John Giorso here. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I wanted to let you know that this episode has been brought to you by Orca Pacific, the agency I founded to help brands succeed on the Amazon platform. If you need any services that relate to success on the platform, whether it be content, advertising, SEO, help on the back end when it comes to operational support, etc., feel free to reach out to our team. The best way to get in touch with us is on LinkedIn. And with that, we'll get back to the show. Back to school, something you have a lot of experience with, on Amazon and other channels. I guess Prime Day aside, how do you think COVID affects back to school? Let's say everyone's going back to school, right? So the lists will be the same. Let's assume that. But people, I mean, do you think it's going to have a major impact? Do you think it's going to shift consumers online that were hesitant to do their back to school shopping online? Because back to school is, it's a big deal for Amazon, but it's been kind of hard to crack for them, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it can't help but be more important online, simply because there's always going to be some percentage of people that don't want to walk into the store.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's online or in-store pickup is less clear.
Yeah.
I always thought the reason that more physical retail happens at back to school It's because in truth, it's just a better shopping experience.
It's just easier, right?
It's easier to pick up. You're dealing with a lot of you're dealing with high quantity, low dollar value.
Yeah.
You can pick up and touch and put in your bag. And it's just, it's not the same as some of the other seasonals.
Yeah.
And it's a trigger for kids going back to school that, hey, you're going back to school. Let's get some new stuff.
It's an experience. It's a kind of a fun thing.
That experience I think is important.
Yeah.
But I think there will be enough people who don't want to go into stores.
Yeah.
And it is going to have an impact.
Sure.
Well, I'm not sure how much. I think the piece that I've been thinking about, one is I think the list will be bigger than it's been because
why is that?
I think more cleaning supplies will make the list.
That makes sense. Sure.
So it'll be as much. It's always been heavily student use.
Yep.
I think that'll still be a factor, and there's always been a couple of things that sneak in for the classroom.
Sure.
I think it'll be more this year.
Okay.
And then I also think that depending on schools and how they solve the distances between kids, that's going to have a factor. You may end up having some schools where the parents want to have kit product at home and at school.
Yeah.
So because they may not be at school for a full day, they may, if some schools decide to split day in order to gain space, that may actually drive more consumption.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the first really interesting evolution coming out, because you got to believe by September we're all coming out of this.
Sure.
Whatever the next normal is.
Yeah.
Then you're getting a little closer to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, COVID aside, I've always found the sort of hesitancy in a really significant way to go online for back to school. The fact that as a season, it's kind of had a pretty strong holdout at brick and mortar to be interesting. But
I just prefer it. I mean, I'm a big shopper, but when it comes to back to school with the kids,
yeah,
I prefer to go in the store. I prefer to walk the aisle and look at and go through the list with them, make them part of the process.
Interesting. So that's a good. Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, at some point, having 12 different boxes with, box of crayons and a box with a ruler in it show up at your house over 3 days. It's just like, it gets ridiculous at some point. I certainly understand that.
And outside of the apparel, most of those things are under a couple of bucks.
Yeah. So, do you have to buy the bigger pack online?
High quantity, big pack.
Yeah.
A lot of pick and pack.
Yeah.
A great model for a pure e-com business.
Yeah. It's not profitable either. So there's also that. Yeah. So, how do you think of back to school when it comes to omnichannel? I mean, do you think omnichannel, like this Walmart click and collect program, does that kind of get you the best of both worlds?
I think it comes a little closer. Certainly financially, it's easier to walk the store and have somebody pick it and deliver it.
Yeah.
Because they've already set up the aisle and everything's right there.
Sure.
And so I think I think what'll happen is there'll be a few less people in the store. There'll be more click and collect, and there'll be some direct pure play e-com. Yeah. Primarily Amazon. Yeah. And I think so you will see some share shift coming out of it. I think that's unavoidable because of COVID.
Yep.
But I think it's more about the health and safety feeling in the stores and how much people want to walk through the store, because there's also a lot of traffic that time of year. Back to school is a big shopping season. So there's a lot of traffic, and some people won't feel as comfortable in the store as others will be.
Yeah.
So I think that's unavoidable. You'll see some shifting. What I don't know is whether or not that'll be permanent. I don't know if people will find it to be a good enough experience that that's the way they want to do it in the future. I think that's a big unknown.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think there's the categories online right now that it's very hard to argue that it's not just a fundamentally better experience to buy something online. It's
oh, for sure.
You're going to buy a TV or something, to have that shipped to your house, set down, it's the same price, you don't have to lug it into your car. Like, that's just a purely better experience in my opinion. But then there's other categories. I think back to school shopping, I think grocery is very debatable whether it's actually a better experience, kind of all things considered, online at this point. I mean, maybe it's more convenient, but more expensive, and there's not as much selection. There's still kind of a give and take required to adopt that. Which is why I even though it doesn't impact me in my Amazon world, all these different things happening with omnichannel, I just find, just personally, just from kind of a consumer behavior standpoint, pretty interesting. Like what's really going to work, what's not. I looked at omnichannel for a long time, candidly, as a bit gimmicky. I thought it was just sort of a way to justify a store. Well, we have a store, so we have to like come up with a model that still involves the store, not just bypass it entirely and go online. I've become convinced more recently that it really holds a unique value for certain customers and serving certain sort of types of shopping, and it actually can be the best option, let alone the fact that it's much more profitable and therefore probably scalable. But just generally, I mean, when you're like, who's doing omnichannel really well when you think about all the big retailers out there?
Well, I think luckily we're talking just a couple of days after the earnings results came out. So you'd have to say Walmart and Target both had really strong quarters. Home Depot did really well.
Yeah.
Best Buy numbers that came out today, even though they were down, I think they were down 19% in 6 weeks, but they were shut down. I mean, all they were doing was curbside and they were only down 19%.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That is pretty impressive. So I think all of those each in their own way are doing it really well, although they're all doing it very differently. So even if you look at Amazon's the dominant pure play today, yesterday, as long as I've been working on it.
Sure.
But from an omni-channel, Target and Walmart both have very different strategies. They're both executing them well, and consumers are voting that all of these are viable. Pickup in stores is viable. The curated line seems to be viable. The home delivery is gaining some real traction. Instacart the numbers are through the roof on Instacart. So I think I don't think this was ever going to be a single dominant model. There have always been multiple channels, and maybe the channels are less about the retailers now and more about the way consumers want to engage. So it's more about the consumer experience that you and I are looking for, and we might be looking for them each a little differently.
Yeah.
And so, and that's true across the board. So I think you're going to find consumers who prefer to have the trust to drive through by the store and have them load up the car, and others that say, no, I really just want it at my door.
Sure.
And then I think what's going to be really interesting is as that omni-channel builds out, because I do think omni-channel is a thing.
Yep.
Is as they're using an app every week for groceries.
Yep.
How does that change behavior on more general merchandise?
Sure.
Now that I'm comfortable that if I have my retailer app on the store, as they start to build out their portfolio of product lines, how much of that do I shift to, I'm on there every week anyway, I'll just get this.
Yeah. Just throw it in the cart.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the interesting thing to watch.
Yeah. That's interesting. So do you then kind of believe that this retail battle over the next decade is kind of won or lost with grocery?
I do think that that grocery has an overweighted impact.
Yeah.
Grocery is what people do day in and day out.
Yeah.
And the more that habits change with grocery, the more that affects how they interact with everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So who's positioned to win there?
I think if you just go back to the last 2 days, I mean, you look at what Walmart's posting, that's some pretty good numbers in grocery.
Yeah.
I think Kroger's back in the game after being kind of counted out a little bit over time. I think Instacart is showing, I think you're in a place of where it was Amazon and all other, and I don't think you're there anymore. I think now you kind of have to look at each one on their own, and there are definitely players that have viable models.
Yeah. Interesting.
And consumers are going to vote.
Yeah. 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 It's funny. Obviously there's all this experimenting that Amazon's doing with brick and mortar. Over the last, maybe just, Whole Foods was obviously a big deal when they bought Whole Foods, but I think it's become really obvious over the last year with all this experimentation that they're now starting to do. And obviously a lot of that's been paused for the time being, but that they really see brick and mortar as kind of a fundamental piece of their overall model, that even Whole Foods, you could argue that was kind of an add-on or plug-in, to what they were currently doing with their core business. And it really wasn't that integrated. And so was it just they needed groceries, so they bought a grocery chain and kind of check that box? But I think what you're seeing is that Amazon realizes that this omni-channel approach is not going away and could pose a really significant competitive threat to them at some point. I mean, I'm curious, do you agree or do you see it differently?
No, I see it the same. I think what they got with Whole Foods, I think Whole Foods did a couple of things. One of them, it gave Amazon a lot of experience in physical retail.
Yep.
because they were not necessarily big enough to have an impact on the market, but big enough for them to really get their hands dirty and what it's like to run a retailer.
Sure.
And the other thing is it woke up a lot of other retailers and
Yeah.
said, this is a serious threat and we need to take it seriously.
Yeah.
And then COVID is kind of like the second punch.
Yeah.
Amazon may have thought they had more time than they had.
Yeah.
And now everybody just pushed 2, 3, 4 years, pick a number
Yep.
forward.
Yeah.
Almost instantaneously. Everything that people might have been debating whether or not it was a good idea.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there were no other options. So yeah, let's go try a dark store. Let's go try, like, there's just so much more innovation happening at the moment because they just don't have a lot of alternatives. And some of those things are going to fail and retailers aren't going to like them. Other things are going to succeed and they're going to push harder on the gas.
Yeah.
And manufacturers with them, because manufacturers are learning just as fast as the retailers are learning about how do you grow your business in each of these environments.
Yeah. Necessity is the mother of all invention, right?
When you have no other alternatives, you find what you find something that works.
Yeah. That's super interesting. It's, the self-disruption kind of concept, in Silicon Valley, and one that Amazon's taken on is it's easy to put on a bumper sticker. It's actually really hard to do as an organization because there's all these perverse incentives to not be doing that. But
especially when you're a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so much easier just to sit back and kind of milk whatever you have. But like when you're forced into it, I mean, it's interesting. Like, yeah, you're right. You're seeing all these other retailers do stuff that they wouldn't probably have really done on their own, or they may have tiptoed into it a bit. And now they're just going, okay, give it a shot, try it. Like, we don't have a choice. So
it broke down a lot of barriers.
Yeah. Yeah. Chuck, anything else you think our audience would benefit from knowing?
There's so much happening right now that, and you've had so many other good guests on with so much more interesting things to talk about, that I think the bottom line for me is it is coming out of COVID as a different world with more engaged retailers and omnichannel who are going to invest more in e-commerce, who are going to make it part of their business as opposed to a sideline of their business.
Yeah.
That's going to make, over the next 3 to 5 years, that's going to change a lot.
Yeah.
In ways that I certainly can't predict. Some things I have ideas about, some other things I'm sure I'll be wrong on.
Sure.
But I don't think it's going to be a one-horse race coming out of this. I think I think there's going to be other horses in the race.
Yeah, I think, and I think, the more change there is, the more opportunity it opens up for the folks that are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the way I've always seen Amazon is they're changing so quickly that it just constantly presents new opportunities, but you also have to be, frankly, you have to be on top of it, and you have to be willing to take risks and experiment and do all these different things. But I agree. I think as a brand, like just, Amazon and all these other guys, there's just, when they experiment, they need brands to kind of partner with them on that. I mean, Amazon's always needed some brands at the forefront who are willing to take a risk with them. And often there's a big benefit if that pays off for the brand. So
yeah, I think that's I think that's still going to be true with Amazon. I think they're still doing a lot of really interesting things.
Sure.
It's just that now as a brand, you have to think beyond Amazon. You have to say, hey, what do I want to do with Amazon? What are things that are interesting there? And what are these new other opportunities that I might want to try, even if they end up blowing back into something I end up doing on Amazon later?
Yeah.
There's just so, the biggest challenge is actually going to be sorting out which ones you can afford to do, which ones have the best opportunity, because there are going to be opportunities everywhere.
Sure.
Trial, and the people who guess right or who place a lot of small bets and then really lean heavily in the ones that work, they're going to come out of this in a very good position, I believe.
Yeah. Awesome. Chuck, how do people get a hold of you? How do they learn more about what you're up to?
You can reach me at chuck.linden@CandelaGrowthPartners.com.
Cool.
Or just check me out on LinkedIn and just send me a LinkedIn connection.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for being on.
My pleasure, John. Good talking to you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of eCommerce Deep Dive. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. If you did, go in and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, and make sure to leave us a review while you're at it. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.